The phone call that changed everything came on a Wednesday evening while I was standing in my cramped Chicago apartment kitchen, stirring a pot of instant ramen and wondering how my life had become so small. At 28, I should have been thriving, but instead I was barely surviving as a paralegal at a mid-tier law firm, watching my law school classmates climb corporate ladders while I remained stuck on the bottom rung. The caller ID showed my sister's name, and I almost didn't answer. Emma rarely called unless she needed something or wanted to gloat about her latest achievement. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah, thank God you picked up. Emma's voice was breathless with excitement. You'll never guess what happened today. David proposed, right there at the country club, in front of everyone. It was absolutely magical. I forced enthusiasm into my voice despite the familiar sting of being left behind. That's wonderful, Em. Congratulations. My sister Emma, 2 years younger but somehow always ahead, was marrying into the Blackwood family, one of the wealthiest in our hometown of Millbrook. David Blackwood was everything our parents had always hoped. One of their daughters would catch handsome, rich, well-connected, and utterly boring. We're having an engagement party next month. Emma continued, her voice taking on that particular tone she used when she was about to deliver news she knew would hurt. A small, intimate affair. Just family and David's closest friends. You know how it is. I knew exactly how it was. Small and intimate was code for too prestigious for Sarah. But before I could respond, Emma surprised me. Actually, that's why I'm calling. Mom and Dad want to have a family dinner this Sunday to celebrate and discuss wedding plans. They specifically asked me to invite you. The shock nearly made me drop my phone. Our parents, Margaret and Richard Coleman, had barely acknowledged my existence since I'd graduated law school and taken a job they deemed beneath our family's social standing. In their eyes, I should have landed a position at a prestigious firm, married well, and produced grandchildren by now. Instead, I was single, struggling, and working for what my father dismissively called ambulance chasers. They want me there? I asked, unable to hide my surprise. Emma's laugh had an edge to it. Don't get too excited. I think they just want to make sure you behave yourself at the engagement party. You know how you can be sometimes. How I could be. The family disappointment who asked uncomfortable questions and refused to play along with their elaborate pretenses. What time? Sunday at 6. Mom's making her famous pot roast. Oh, and Sarah? Try to dress appropriately this time. David's parents might stop by. After Emma hung up, I stood in my kitchen staring at the wall, trying to process what had just happened. A family dinner invitation. After 18 months of being systematically excluded from holiday gatherings, birthday celebrations and family events, they suddenly wanted me there. Something was wrong. Our family didn't do reconciliation or olive branches. We did guilt, manipulation, and carefully orchestrated social climbing. I spent the rest of the evening researching the Blackwood family, a habit I developed from my paralegal work. What I found was impressive and troubling in equal measure. David's father, Harrison Blackwood, owned half of Millbrook's commercial real estate and sat on the boards of 3 major corporations. His mother, Victoria, chaired the hospital's fundraising committee and had been featured in Chicago Magazine as one of the area's most influential women. They were old money, established power, exactly the kind of family my parents had always aspired to join. But there were other details that nagged at me. A lawsuit filed against Blackwood Properties 3 years ago by former tenants, claiming unsafe living conditions. An environmental violation that had been quietly settled out of court. A pattern of complaints from small business owners about predatory lease practices. Nothing that had made major headlines, but enough to paint a picture of a family that used their wealth and influence to avoid accountability. Thursday and Friday crawled by at work. I spent my days reviewing depositions for a personal injury case, while my mind wandered to Sunday's dinner. My boss, Janet Martinez, noticed my distraction during our Friday afternoon case review. "You're somewhere else today, Sarah," she observed, closing the file we'd been discussing. "Everything okay?" Janet was one of the few people who knew the full extent of my family dysfunction. She'd been the one to find me crying in the bathroom after my parents failed to show up for my law school graduation because they'd been attending Emma's sorority form. "My family invited me to dinner," I said, which probably sounded ridiculous to anyone with normal family relationships. Janet raised an eyebrow. "That's good news, isn't it? With my family, nothing is ever that simple. Emma's engaged to Harrison Blackwood's son, the Harrison Blackwood, the real estate mogul." Janet's expression shifted to concern. "Sarah, I've seen enough cases involving the Blackwood properties to know they're not the upstanding citizens they pretend to be. Be careful." "Careful of what?" "It's just a family dinner. Your instincts are usually good about people and situations. If something feels off about this invitation, trust that feeling." Saturday night, I stood in front of my closet, trying to decode Emma's directive to dress appropriately. Everything I owned would be wrong by my family's standard. Too cheap, too casual, too obviously from Target, instead of Nordstrom. I finally settled on a navy blue dress I'd bought for job interviews, paired with my only decent pair of heels and the pearl earrings my grandmother had left me. The drive to Millbrook took 45 minutes, carrying me from my urban neighborhood of converted warehouses and ethnic restaurants to the manicured suburbs where I'd grown up. Nothing had changed in the tree-lined streets of my childhood. The same massive houses sat behind perfectly maintained lawns, the same luxury cars filled driveways, the same sense of quiet superiority hung in the air like expensive perfume. My parents' house looked exactly as I remembered it, a colonial revival with white columns and black shutters, designed to project old money despite being built in the 1990s. The circular driveway was empty except for my father's Mercedes, which meant David's parents hadn't stopped by after all. I sat in my 10-year-old Honda Civic for a moment, gathering courage and wondering why I'd agreed to this. My mother answered the door before I could knock, her smile bright and artificial. Margaret Coleman had perfected the art of appearing warm while remaining completely cold, a skill that had served her well in Millbrook's social circles. "Sarah, darling, you look lovely," she said, air kissing my cheek. "That dress is so practical." In my mother's vocabulary, that was code for cheap but acceptable. She led me through the foyer, past the family photos that chronicled Emma's achievements while somehow managing to include very few of me. The house smelled of furniture polish, and my mother's signature Jo Malone candles, scents that triggered a complicated mix of nostalgia and anxiety. "Richard, Sarah's here," my mother called as we entered the living room. My father looked up from his Wall Street Journal, folding it with the precise movements that characterized everything he did. He'd aged since I'd last seen him, silver threading through his dark hair and new lines around his eyes, but he still projected the same air of quiet authority that had intimidated me throughout my childhood. "Sarah," he said, standing to give me a brief, awkward hug. "Good to see you." The formality was crushing. This was how they greeted business associates, not their daughter. Emma bounded down the stairs then, radiant in a way that only the newly engaged can manage. She looked perfect, as always, her blonde hair in a polished bob, and her engagement ring catching the light like a small star. "Sarah, I'm so glad you could make it," she said, embracing me with genuine warmth that caught me off guard. For a moment, she was just my little sister again, excited to share her news. "Let me see the ring," I said, and she practically thrust her hand in my face. The diamond was enormous, probably worth more than I made in a year. "It's beautiful, Em. David has good taste." "He really does," she sighed happily. "Oh, Sarah, I wish you could find someone like him, someone stable and successful who could take care of you." There it was, the subtle dig wrapped in sisterly concern. Emma had never mastered our parents' art of elegant cruelty, but she tried. We moved to the dining room where my mother had set the table with her good china and crystal. The pot roast was indeed her famous recipe, the one she'd served at dinner parties throughout my childhood. I'd forgotten how good it was, how the smell could transport me back to Sunday dinners when our family had felt more functional, before my failures had become so apparent. The conversation started safely enough. Emma talked about wedding plans while my parents offered suggestions about venues and guest lists. David was finishing his MBA at Northwestern and would be joining his father's company full-time after graduation. They were thinking about a spring wedding, something elegant but not ostentatious. I listened and smiled and tried to remember how to be part of a family. It was during dessert that things took an unexpected turn. My mother served her famous apple tart while my father poured coffee from their silver service. The ritual was so familiar it was almost comforting. "Sarah," my father said, settling back in his chair with his coffee, "your mother and I have been talking, and we realize we may have been too harsh with you over the past few years." I nearly choked on my tart. Richard Coleman didn't do apologies or admissions of fault. "What do you mean?" "We've been proud of you for making your own way," my mother added, her voice gentle. "It takes courage to work at a smaller firm, to help regular people with their legal problems. We know we haven't always showed our appreciation for that choice." I stared at them, searching their faces for signs of sarcasm or manipulation, but they seemed sincere, my father's expression softer than I'd seen it in years. "Thank you." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I managed. "That means a lot." Emma reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "We want you to be part of the wedding, Sarah. Really part of it. I was hoping you'd be my maid of honor." The offer hit me like a physical blow. Maid of honor. After years of being excluded, they wanted me to stand beside Emma on the most important day of her life. Tears pricked my eyes. Despite my best efforts to maintain composure, "I would love that," I whispered. "Wonderful," my mother said, clapping her hands together. "We'll need to start planning immediately. The engagement party is in 3 weeks, and there's so much to coordinate." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of wedding talk and family memories. They asked about my work with genuine interest for the first time in years. My father even admitted that he respected my choice to work in family law, helping people navigate divorce and custody issues. "It's important work," he said over brandy in the living room. "These people need someone who cares about their outcomes, not just billable hours." As the evening wound down, my mother walked me to the door. "Sarah, I hope this can be a new beginning for our family. We've missed you more than you know." The drive back to Chicago passed in a haze of confused emotions. I'd gotten everything I'd wanted from my family for years: acceptance, inclusion, respect. So why did something feel wrong? Why couldn't I shake the feeling that this reconciliation was too sudden, too complete, too convenient? I spent most of Sunday night lying awake, analyzing every conversation from dinner. My family had been warm and welcoming, but there was something rehearsed about their responses. The timing bothered me too. Why now? Why this sudden change of heart just as Emma was marrying into one of the most powerful families in the area? Monday morning brought a distraction in the form of a new case file on my desk. Janet had assigned me to help with research on a class action lawsuit, something about tenant rights violations at a large apartment complex. I was halfway through the initial documents when a name jumped out at me: Blackwood Properties. My blood went cold as I read the detail. The lawsuit alleged systematic harassment of tenants, illegal rent increases, and deliberately creating unsafe living conditions to force out long-term residents. The lead plaintiff was a single mother named Rosa Martinez, who claimed Blackwood Properties had cut off her heat in the middle of winter to force her to break her lease. I dug deeper into the file, my stomach churning as the pattern became clear. Blackwood Properties specialized in buying affordable housing complexes, then making life miserable for existing tenants until they moved out. The buildings would then be renovated and rented at much higher rates. It was gentrification through intimidation, and it was devastating communities throughout the Chicago area. The worst part was the timeline. Many of these incidents had occurred within the past 2 years, meaning David would have been aware of his family's business practice. Emma was marrying into a family that systematically destroyed people's lives for profit. I tried to focus on other work, but my mind kept returning to Sunday's dinner. Had my family known about this lawsuit when they invited me? Was this reconciliation connected somehow to Emma's engagement to David? The questions multiplied faster than I could answer them. Tuesday brought another revelation that made my stomach drop even further. While reviewing case precedents for the Blackwood lawsuit, I discovered that my own law firm had represented several tenants in previous disputes with Blackwood properties. Janet had been handling these cases personally, and from what I could see in the files, she'd been quite successful. 3 separate settlements in the past year, all with substantial payouts and non-disclosure agreements. This meant Janet knew exactly who the Blackwoods were when I'd mentioned Emma's engagement. Her warning about being careful suddenly took on new meaning. She wasn't just offering generic advice about wealthy families, she knew specifically what kind of people they were. I was still processing this information when my phone rang. Emma's name flashed on the screen, and I answered with more trepidation than excitement. Sarah. Hi, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important at work, just research. What's up? I wanted to talk to you about the engagement party. David's parents are so excited to meet you, and I want everything to be perfect. Emma's voice had that particular quality it took on when she was nervous about something. I was wondering if you could maybe not mention what you do for work, or at least not be too specific about it. Why would that matter? It's just that David's father can be a little sensitive about lawyers, something about frivolous lawsuits hurting good businesses. You know how these successful men can be. I knew exactly how they could be. Emma, what kind of business does Harrison Blackwood run? Real estate, mostly, apartment buildings and commercial properties, very successful, very respectable. Why? The word respectable hung between us like a lie waiting to be exposed. No reason. I'm just trying to understand the family I'm supposed to be welcoming into our. Sarah, you're not going to do that thing you do, are you? Where you ask uncomfortable questions and make everyone awkward. That thing I do. Critical thinking. Apparently, I'll be perfectly polite, Emma, but I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not. Of course not. I just want this to go smoothly. This is really important to me. After Emma hung up, I sat at my desk staring at the Blackwood case files spread in front of me. My sister was about to marry into a family that my own law firm was actively suing for tenant harassment. My parents had suddenly reconciled with me just weeks before the engagement party, and now Emma was asking me to hide my profession from my future in-laws. The pieces were starting to form a picture, but it was still incomplete. What did my family know about the Blackwoods' business practice? Why did they suddenly want me included in wedding celebrations? And why was Emma so nervous about David's parents meeting me? I decided to do what I did best. Research. Over the next several days I dove deep into everything I could find about the Blackwood family and their business empire. What I discovered painted a picture of a family that had built their wealth through increasingly questionable means. Harrison Blackwood had started with a few small apartment buildings in the 1980s, nothing wrong with that, but over the decades, complaints had mounted about his business practice. Tenants reported heating systems that conveniently broke down during lease negotiations, maintenance requests that went unanswered until code violations forced tenants to move, sudden rent increases that violated local ordinances but were difficult to challenge without expensive legal representation. The pattern was clear and devastating. The Blackwoods targeted low-income tenants who couldn't afford to fight back legally. They used their wealth and influence to avoid consequences, settling the few cases that made it to court with non-disclosure agreements that prevented any public accountability. Victoria Blackwood, despite her charitable facade, was equally complicit. Her position on various nonprofit boards gave the family social credibility, while Harrison systematically destroyed affordable housing. It was a perfect cover for systematic exploitation of vulnerable people. But the most disturbing discovery came when I cross-referenced the Blackwood properties tenant list with local voter registration records. Many of the tenants who'd been forced out through harassment lived in predominantly minority neighborhoods. The Blackwoods weren't just engaging in aggressive business practices, they were systematically displacing communities of color under the guise of property improvement. The research consumed my evenings for the rest of the week. I couldn't stop digging, couldn't stop uncovering new layers of corruption and cruelty. By Friday, I had compiled a comprehensive file on the Blackwood family's business practices that would have impressed any prosecutor. The question was what to do with this information. Emma was head over heels in love with David, and as far as I could tell, she had no idea what his family really did for a living. My parents seemed thrilled about the engagement, probably seeing it as their ticket into Millbrook's highest social circle. Was it my responsibility to destroy my sister's happiness with inconvenient truths? Friday evening, Janet stopped by my desk as I was packing up to leave. "You've been working late this week," she observed. "Everything okay?" I looked at the stack of Blackwood research I'd been trying to hide under other files. Janet's eyes followed my gaze, and her expression shifted to understanding. "You've been researching your sister's fiancé's family." It wasn't a question. "How did you?" "Because I would have done the same thing." Janet pulled up a chair beside my desk. "What did you find?" I gave her the highlights: the systematic tenant harassment, the targeting of minority communities, the use of wealth and influence to avoid accountability. Janet listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious with each revelation. "Sarah, I need to tell you something," she said when I finished. "We've been building a major case against Blackwood Properties for over a year. It's not just about individual tenant complaints anymore. We're looking at potential RICO violations, civil rights violations, conspiracy to commit fraud. This could bring down their entire operation." The room seemed to tilt around me. RICO, like organized crime. The systematic nature of their operations, the coordination between multiple properties, the pattern of targeting specific communities. It meets the criteria. We're talking about potential federal charges, not just civil lawsuits. I felt like I might throw up. My sister was planning to marry into a family that could be facing federal prosecution. Does Emma know? I doubt it. The Blackwoods have been very careful to keep their business practices separate from their social image. David might not even be fully aware of what his father does. But he has to know something. He's been involved in the business for years. Janet nodded grimly, which could make him complicit. "Sarah, I have to ask, how much does your family know about this engagement? About the Blackwoods specifically?" "That's what I've been trying to figure out. The timing of their reconciliation with me seems too convenient. They've excluded me from family events for years, and suddenly they want me to be maid of honor. Have you considered that they might know more than they're letting on? That your invitation to this engagement party might not be what it seems?" The suggestion hit me like cold water. "What do you mean?" "Think about it from their perspective. They have a daughter marrying into a wealthy family. They also have another daughter who works for a law firm that specializes in exactly the kind of cases that could threaten that family. If they know about our investigation..." She didn't need to finish the thought. If my parents knew about the Blackwood investigation, if they knew I worked for the firm leading it, then my sudden inclusion in family events took on a sinister meaning. They weren't reconciling with me out of love or regret. They were trying to control me. "They want me at the engagement party to keep an eye on me," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "To make sure I don't cause problems for Emma's wedding." "It's possible. Sarah, you need to be very careful here. If the Blackwoods discover that you work for us, if they realize you have access to information about their business practices, they could use that against the firm, against our clients." Janet nodded. "Or against you personally. These people have a lot of money and influence. They've proven they're willing to use both to silence opposition." I spent the weekend in a state of emotional paralysis. Every interaction with my family over the past week suddenly seemed suspect. My father's unexpected respect for my career choice, my mother's admission that they'd been too harsh with me, Emma's nervousness about me meeting David's parents. They knew. They had to know about the investigation, about my firm's involvement, about the potential threat I represented to their dreams of social advance. The family dinner hadn't been a reconciliation. It had been reconnaissance. But how much did they know? And more importantly, how far would they go to protect Emma's engagement? My parents had always prioritized social status over almost everything else. But would they sacrifice one daughter to secure the other's future? Sunday afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. I called Emma and asked if we could meet for coffee to discuss maid of honor duty. She suggested a trendy cafe in downtown Millbrook, the kind of place where she could see and be seen by the right people. I arrived early and chose a table in the back corner, away from the main flow of foot traffic. Emma breezed in 15 minutes later, perfectly dressed and radiating the confident happiness of a woman whose life was going exactly according to plan. "Sarah, thank you so much for making time for this," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "I know you've been busy with work." "Speaking of work," I said, deciding to be direct, "I need to ask you something about David's family. What do you know about their business?" Emma's smile faltered slightly. "I told you, real estate. Very successful. Why do you keep asking about this?" "Because the law firm I work for has been investigating Blackwood properties for over a year. They're facing potential federal charges for systematic tenant harassment and civil rights violations." The color drained from Emma's face. "That's impossible. David's family are good people. They donate to charity. They're involved in the community. They also systematically force low-income tenants out of their homes through harassment and intimidation. I've seen the evidence." Emma said, "It's extensive and damning." Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring into her latte as if it might provide answers. When she looked up, her expression had hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "You're trying to ruin this for me," she said, her voice cold. "You can't stand that I found someone wonderful, that I'm going to have the life you've always wanted." "Emma's isn't about jealousy. This is about you marrying into a family that destroys people's lives for profit. You don't know what you're talking about. David isn't like. He's kind and generous and he loves me." "David may be a good person," I said gently, "but his family's business practices are destroying communities. The evidence is overwhelming." Emma stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I don't want to hear any more of that. You're just trying to sabotage my happiness because you can't find your own." "Emma, please. Just look at the evidence. Ask David about the tenant complaints, about the harassment allegation. I'm not going to poison my relationship with paranoid conspiracy theories from your ambulance-chasing law firm." Emma grabbed her purse, her movements sharp with anger. "The engagement party is next Sunday. You can come and be supportive of your sister, or you can stay home and nurse your jealousy, but I won't let you destroy the best thing that's ever happened to me." She stormed out, leaving me alone at the table with the weight of my family's dysfunction pressing down on me like a physical force. I'd tried to protect Emma from a terrible mistake, and she'd accused me of sabotage. It was exactly the kind of response I should have expected from my family, but something about her reaction bothered me beyond the usual family drama. Emma had been too quick to dismiss my concerns, too ready with accusations of jealousy. It felt rehearsed, like she'd been preparing for this conversation, which meant someone had warned her that I might bring up the Blackwood investigation. The engagement party was in 1 week. My family expected me to attend and play the role of supportive sister and maid of honor. The Blackwoods would be there, possibly including Harrison himself, and somewhere in that room would be the answers to questions that had been consuming me for days. Questions about what my family really knew about the investigation, about whether Emma was truly ignorant of her fiancé's family business, or was choosing to ignore inconvenient truths, about how far they would all go to protect a wedding that represented everything they'd ever wanted. I had 7 days to decide whether to attend the engagement party as the dutiful daughter they expected, or to use the opportunity to uncover truths that might destroy my family permanently. 7 days to choose between the peace of willful ignorance and the chaos of uncomfortable truth. As I sat in that trendy Millbrook cafe, surrounded by the kind of people my family desperately wanted to be, I realized that my choice had already been made. I was going to that engagement party, but I wasn't going as the supportive sister they expected. I was going as someone who had finally learned the difference between family loyalty and enabling corruption. Someone who understood that sometimes love means refusing to be complicit in the harm your loved ones choose to cause or ignore. The dinner invitation had been a trap, but I was about to turn it into something my family would never see coming. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people you care about is force them to confront the truth about who they really are, and what they're really willing to accept in pursuit of their dreams. The engagement party would reveal everything, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what my family might think of me when the truth finally came to light. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray Chicago drizzle that seemed to seep into everything, matching my mood perfectly. I sat at my desk staring at the Blackwood Properties files, my coffee growing cold as I replayed Emma's angry words from the day before. The accusation of jealousy stung because there was enough truth in it to make me question my own motive. Was I really trying to protect my sister, or was I looking for reasons to sabotage her happiness? The internal debate was interrupted by Janet's arrival. She dropped into the chair beside my desk with her own coffee and a grim expression that immediately put me on alert. "We need to talk," she said, glancing around to make sure we couldn't be overheard. "There have been some developments in the Blackwood case that you need to know about." My stomach clenched. "What kind of development?" "The kind that suggests your family dinner last week wasn't as innocent as it seemed." Janet pulled out a manila folder and set it between us. "Over the weekend we received some interesting calls. 3 separate tenants from Blackwood Properties contacted us claiming they'd been approached by private investigators asking questions about our firm." The words hit me like ice water. "What kind of questions?" "Specifically about you, Sarah. They wanted to know if any of our staff lived in the building, if anyone had family connections to the Blackwood family, if our paralegal Sarah Coleman had ever visited the properties." Janet's eyes were serious. "Someone is investigating you." I felt the room tilt slightly. "The Blackwoods know who I am." It gets worse. The investigators weren't just asking random questions. They had photos of you, Sarah. Recent photos. One tenant described seeing a picture of you standing outside this building. The implications crashed over me in waves. The sudden family reconciliation, the dinner invitation, Emma's nervousness about the engagement party, her prepared responses to my questions about David's family. It had all been orchestrated. "They've been watching me," I whispered. "For how long, we don't know. But the fact that they connected you to our firm suggests they've done their homework." Janet leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Sarah, I think your family may be more involved in this than we realized." "What do you mean?" "Think about the timeline. Emma gets engaged to David Blackwood 6 weeks ago. 3 weeks later your parents suddenly decide to reconcile with their estranged daughter who just happens to work for the law firm building a federal case against the Blackwood. 2 weeks after that, private investigators start asking questions about you specifically." Janet spread her hands. "That's not coincidence." The betrayal felt like a physical weight settling in my chest. "You think my family told them about me, about where I work?" "I think your family made a deal. They get to keep their social climbing dreams intact. And in exchange, they help the Blackwoods gather intelligence about the people threatening their empire." I stared at the files on my desk, seeing them differently now. Not just evidence of corporate malfeasance, but ammunition in a war I hadn't even known I was fighting. "What do they want with information about me?" "At minimum they want to know how much you know and whether you pose a threat to the wedding. At maximum," Janet hesitated, "they could be looking for ways to compromise our investigation." Personal leverage against key staff members is a classic tactic for people with enough money to play dirty. The thought made me nauseous. Personal leverage, financial difficulties, family problems, personal relationships. Anything they could use to pressure you into backing off or providing information about our case strategy. Janet's expression was sympathetic but serious. "Sarah, these people have resources and connection. If they see you as a threat to their family's future, they won't hesitate to destroy you." I thought about my conversation with Emma the day before, how quickly she'd dismissed my concerns and accused me of jealousy. Had that reaction been genuine? Or had she been coached on how to respond if I brought up the investigation? "I need to know how much my family is involved," I said. "How much they know what they've agreed to do." That's dangerous thinking. If they're already feeding information to the Blackwoods, confronting them directly could make things worse for everyone. But I can't just sit here and do nothing. Emma's engagement party is this weekend. Harrison Blackwood himself might be there. If I show up knowing what I know now, you could be walking into a trap, Janet finished. "Sarah, I think you should consider staying away from that party entirely." The suggestion felt like another betrayal even though I knew Janet was trying to protect me. If I don't show up, Emma will know something's wrong. And if my family is involved in this surveillance operation, my absence could make them more suspicious about what I know, or it could keep you safe. Safe from what? My own family? Janet was quiet for a moment, studying I've seen what wealthy, powerful people do when they feel threatened. Family ties don't always protect you when millions of dollars and criminal exposure are at stake. The rest of Monday passed in a haze of paranoia and analysis. Every phone call, every email, every casual conversation with colleagues felt potentially significant. Were the Blackwoods monitoring my communications? Had they planted someone in the building? How long had they been watching me? And what had they already learned? Tuesday brought a new layer of complication when my mother called, her voice warm with the kind of maternal affection I hadn't heard in years. "Sarah, darling, I wanted to check in about the engagement party this weekend. Do you need help finding something appropriate to wear?" The offer was so unlike my mother that I immediately suspected ulterior motives. Margaret Coleman had never offered to help me with anything, let alone something as mundane as party clothes. "I think I can manage, Mom. Thank you for asking." "Of course, dear. I just want you to feel comfortable. This party is so important to Emma, and having you there as maid of honor means everything to her." "I'm sure it does." "Sarah, you sound a bit distant. Is everything all right?" The concern in her voice was perfectly calibrated, the kind of maternal worry that would have touched me deeply a week ago. Now it felt like another performance, another manipulation. "I'm fine, just busy with work." "That's wonderful. I'm so proud of how dedicated you are to your career." Another statement that would have meant everything to me before I understood the game being played. "What kind of cases are you working on these days?" There it was, the real reason for the call. Just the usual family law stuff, divorces, custody disputes, nothing too exciting. "I'm sure it's very fulfilling work, helping people through difficult times." My mother's voice had taken on a careful quality, like she was reading from a script. "I imagine you must see all sorts of situations in your line of work. Every case is different." "Of course." "Well, I won't keep you from your important work. We're all so excited to see you on Sunday." After she hung up, I sat staring at my phone, anger building in my chest. The fishing expedition had been so obvious, so clumsily executed, that it almost felt insulting. Did they really think I was stupid enough to not notice what they were doing? But beneath the anger was a deeper hurt. This was my mother, the woman who had raised me, who had once seemed to love me unconditionally. The realization that she was willing to betray me for social advancement was devastating in a way I hadn't expected. Wednesday evening, I made a decision that probably wasn't wise, but felt necessary. I drove back to Millbrook, not to my parents' house, but to the public library where I'd spent countless hours as a teenager. The building was the same, all dark wood and stained glass windows, smelling of old books and quiet desperation. I claimed a computer terminal in a corner where I could see anyone approaching, and began a different kind of research project. Not about the Blackwoods this time, but about my own family. If they were willing to spy on me for their new allies, I wanted to know exactly what I was dealing with. What I found was both expected and shocking. My father's financial situation was more precarious than I'd realized. His accounting practice had been struggling for years, losing clients to larger firms that could offer more comprehensive services. The house I'd grown up in, the one that projected such an image of success, was mortgaged to the hilt. My parents were drowning in debt, while maintaining their expensive lifestyle. My mother's situation was equally revealing. Her volunteer work and social commitments weren't just hobbies, they were a full-time job, maintaining the family's social status. She served on boards, organized fundraisers, and managed the complex web of relationships that kept the Coleman family relevant in Millbrook's social hierarchy. But the most damaging discovery came when I looked into Emma's financial situation. My sister, who I'd always assumed was supported by our parents, was actually supporting them. Her job at a marketing firm downtown paid well, but not well enough to fund the lifestyle she'd been maintaining. The designer clothes, the expensive car, the upscale apartment, all of it was financed through credit and loans that she was struggling to manage. The Blackwood engagement wasn't just about love or social advancement. For my family, it was about financial survival. David represented security, stability, and an end to the precarious existence they'd been maintaining for years. Harrison Blackwood's wealth could solve all their problems with a single generous wedding gift or business investment. Understanding the stakes made their betrayal both more comprehensible and more hurtful. They weren't just social climbers anymore, they were desperate people who saw me as an obstacle to their salvation. From their perspective, protecting the Blackwood alliance was a matter of survival, and family loyalty came second to financial necessity. Thursday morning brought yet another revelation, when Janet pulled me into her office with an expression I'd learned to associate with very bad news. "The private investigators made contact," she said without preamble. "They approached one of our junior associates yesterday, claiming to be potential clients interested in tenant rights cases." "What did they want?" "Information about our current caseload, our success rate with property management companies, and specifically whether we'd ever handled cases involving Blackwood properties." Janet sat heavily in her chair. "Marcus is sharp enough to recognize a fishing expedition when he sees one, but the fact that they're getting bolder is concerning." "What does this mean for the case?" "It means they're escalating their intelligence gathering. They're not content to just watch and wait anymore. They want active information about our strategy, our evidence, our timeline." I felt a chill of recognition. The engagement party is this Sunday. If they're accelerating their investigation, it's because they're planning something. That's what I'm afraid of. "Sarah, I think they're going to use the party to make some kind of move. Either to neutralize you as a threat, or to gather information they can use against our case." "What kind of move?" Janet was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing how much to tell me. "Harrison Blackwood has a reputation for crushing opposition before it can gain momentum. He's done it to tenant organizers, to whistleblowing employees, to anyone who threatens his business interests. The methods vary, but the result is always the same. The threat disappears." "Are you saying he would hurt me physically?" "I'm saying he would use whatever leverage he could find to neutralize you as a problem. Physical intimidation is usually unnecessary when you have enough money and influence to destroy someone's life through legal means." The thought was terrifying in its implication. "What kind of legal means?" "Harassment lawsuits, defamation claims, professional sabotage, criminal charges for manufactured offenses. Rich people with good lawyers can make anyone's life a nightmare if they're motivated enough." I spent Thursday night lying awake, staring at the ceiling and trying to process the reality of my situation. My family had sold me out to powerful people who saw me as a threat to their criminal enterprise. The engagement party I'd been invited to attend was likely a trap designed to gather information or create an opportunity for retaliation. The smart thing would be to stay home, to avoid the party entirely, and hope that my absence would be interpreted as disinterest rather than knowledge. But the thought of Emma standing at that party, surrounded by people who were using her for their own ends, was unbearable. Whatever mistakes she was making, whatever willful blindness she was engaging in, she was still my sister. Friday morning, I made another decision that Janet definitely wouldn't approve of. I called Emma's office and asked her assistant to set up a lunch meeting. Not a confrontational coffee date like our previous encounter, but a professional meeting between sisters who needed to discuss wedding logistics. We met at an upscale restaurant in downtown Chicago, the kind of place where business deals were made over overpriced salad. Emma arrived precisely on time, looking polished and confident in a way that seemed more pronounced than usual, as if she was wearing professionalism like armor. "Sarah, thank you for reaching out," she said as we were seated. "I was hoping we could clear the air before Sunday's party." "That's exactly what I wanted to discuss." I waited until the server had taken our orders before continuing. "I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course. Do you know that the law firm I work for is investigating David's father's company?" Emma's pause was just long enough to confirm my suspicions. "I know you think there might be some issues with their business practices." "That's not what I asked. I asked if you know about the federal investigation into Blackwood properties. The RICO case. The civil rights violation. The systematic harassment of tenants." Emma's composure cracked slightly. "Sarah, you're making this sound much more serious than it actually is." "It is serious. Federal prosecutors don't pursue RICO cases lightly. Your fiancé's family could be facing criminal charges that would send them to prison and destroy their business empire." "You're exaggerating." David explained that there have been some frivolous lawsuits from disgruntled tenants, but that's normal in real estate. People try to take advantage of successful landlords all the time. The response was too polished, too prepared. David explained. When did you discuss this with him? We've talked about it generally. He's very passionate about providing quality housing to people who need it. The Blackwood family has been helping Chicago's working families for decades. I stared at my sister, searching her face for signs of the person I'd grown up with. Emma, do you actually believe that, or are you just telling yourself what you need to hear? I believe the man I love when he tells me his family are good people who've been unfairly targeted by opportunistic lawyers. The phrase opportunistic lawyers hit me like a slap. Is that what David calls people like me? Emma had the grace to look uncomfortable. That's not what I meant. Yes, it is. You've been coached on how to respond to my questions. David or his family, or maybe even our parents, have prepared you for this conversation. No one has coached me. I'm just trying to protect my relationship from your need to find problems where none exist. My need to find problems. The anger I'd been suppressing finally bubbled over. Emma, I've seen the evidence. I've read the testimonies from tenants who were harassed, intimidated, and forced out of their homes. These aren't frivolous lawsuits. These are systematic violations of civil rights. Even if that were true, which I don't believe it is, what does it have to do with David and me? He's not responsible for every business decision his father makes. He's been involved in the company for years. He knows exactly what his family does to make their money. Emma leaned forward, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. Sarah, I'm going to say this once, and I need you to really hear me. I love David. I'm going to marry him regardless of what you think about his family. And if you try to sabotage this wedding with your conspiracy theories, I will never forgive you. And if I'm right, if David's family are criminals who've built their wealth by destroying other people's lives, what then? Then I guess I'll deal with that when it becomes relevant. But right now, all I see is my jealous sister trying to ruin the best thing that's ever happened to me. We finished lunch in strained silence, both of us picking at our food while avoiding eye contact. As we prepared to leave, Emma made one final attempt at reconciliation. Sarah, the engagement party is important to me, more important than you realize. I need you there as my maid of honor, showing support for our family. Can you do that for me? Can you put aside your suspicions for one evening and just be my sister? Looking at her face, seeing the genuine plea beneath the careful composure, I felt my resolve waver. This was Emma, the little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, who had looked up to me with hero worship, until our parents taught her I was a disappointment. I'll be there, I promised. But I need you to promise me something too. If you ever discover that I was right about the Blackwoods, if you ever find evidence of what they really are, you'll remember this conversation. You'll remember that I tried to warn you. I'll remember, she said, but I could tell she didn't believe she'd ever need to. Friday evening, I sat in my apartment preparing for what felt like a military operation. Sunday's engagement party wasn't just a social event anymore. It was a confrontation that would determine the future of my relationship with my family and potentially my personal safety. I reviewed everything I knew about the Blackwoods, their business practices, their legal vulnerabilities, and their methods of dealing with threats. I considered the evidence my firm had compiled and tried to anticipate how they might use the party to gather information or create leverage against me. Most importantly, I tried to prepare myself emotionally for what I might discover about my family's involvement. The private investigators, the coached responses, the sudden reconciliation, all of it pointed to a level of betrayal that was still difficult to accept. My parents and sister weren't just choosing social advancement over family loyalty. They were actively collaborating with people who had threatened me professionally and personally. Saturday night, I called Janet to give her a final update on my decision to attend the party. Sarah, I really wish you would reconsider this. Nothing good can come from walking into what we both know is a trap. I have to know how deep this goes. I told her, I have to understand what my family has agreed to do, and whether there's any chance of saving Emma from making the biggest mistake of her life. And if you can't save her, if she's already chosen her side. It was the question I'd been avoiding, the possibility that hurt too much to consider fully. Then at least I'll know where I stand. At least I'll know who my family really is. Just promise me you'll be careful. Trust your instincts, document everything you can, and get out if the situation becomes dangerous. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold, one of those brilliant winter days that made Chicago look almost beautiful. I dressed carefully in the most expensive outfit I owned, a black cocktail dress that had cost me a week's salary but would help me blend in with the Millbrook crowd. I wanted to look like I belonged, like I was confident and unthreatened by whatever the day might bring. The drive to Millbrook felt longer than usual, giving me too much time to second-guess my decision. Every mile took me further from the safety of my normal life, and closer to a confrontation that would change everything. But by the time I reached the familiar tree-lined streets of my childhood, my resolve had hardened into something unbreakable. The engagement party was being held at the Millbrook Country Club, a sprawling colonial building that had been the epicenter of local society for generations. Cars filled the circular driveway, expensive vehicles that represented the kind of wealth I'd grown up envying but had never achieved. I parked between a Mercedes and a BMW, checking my appearance one final time in the rearview mirror. To any observer, I looked like a successful young professional attending her sister's engagement party. No one would suspect that I was actually walking into enemy territory, armed with knowledge that could destroy the guest of honor's future in-law. The party was already in full swing when I entered the club's main ballroom. The space was decorated with Emma's favorite flowers, white roses and peonies arranged in elaborate centerpieces that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Servers circulated with champagne and canapés while a jazz quartet provided sophisticated background music. I spotted my parents immediately, holding court near the bar with a group of their social peers. My mother looked radiant in a navy blue dress that emphasized her still excellent figure, while my father projected his usual air of quiet authority. They appeared to be the proud parents of the bride-to-be, basking in the reflected glory of their daughter's excellent marriage. Emma stood near the windows with David, both of them glowing with happiness as they received congratulations from a steady stream of well-wishers. David was everything I'd expected from Emma's descriptions: tall, handsome, well-dressed, and utterly charming. He had the kind of easy confidence that came from a lifetime of privilege, the assumption that the world would always arrange itself for his convenience. But it was the older couple standing nearby that made my breath catch. Harrison and Victoria Blackwood were exactly what I'd expected from their photos, but seeing them in person added a dimension that pictures couldn't capture. Harrison was imposing in the way that only truly powerful men could be, his presence commanding attention without effort. Victoria was elegant and poised, the kind of woman who could chair a charity gala in the morning and attend a congressional fundraiser in the evening. They looked like pillars of the community, successful business leaders who supported worthy causes and raised accomplished children. No one looking at them would suspect that their wealth came from systematically destroying poor people's lives. I made my way through the crowd, accepting congratulations on Emma's engagement, and making small talk with relatives I hadn't seen in years. Everyone was perfectly polite, but I could sense an undercurrent of curiosity about my presence. The prodigal daughter had returned, and people wanted to understand why. "Sarah, darling, you look lovely," my mother said when I finally reached the family group. Her embrace was warm and seemingly genuine, but I could feel the tension in her shoulders. "Come, let me introduce you to some people." The next 20 minutes were a carefully orchestrated series of introductions. Business associates of my father's, social friends of my mother's, pillars of Millbrook society, who had watched me grow up and were now assessing my adult worth. I played my part perfectly, the successful young professional who had come home to celebrate her sister's happiness. But throughout the mingling, I was aware of being watched, not by the general party guests, but by specific individuals who seemed to be paying particular attention to my conversations and movements. Men in expensive suits who appeared to be security or business associates, women who claimed to be family friends but asked pointed questions about my work and living situation. The surveillance was subtle but unmistakable to someone who was looking for it. The Blackwoods had indeed turned the engagement party into an intelligence gathering operation, and I was the primary target. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet Harrison and Victoria Blackwood," my father said, appearing at my elbow with perfect timing. David's parents, who were so excited to welcome into our family. Harrison Blackwood's handshake was firm and assessing, his pale blue eyes, studying my face with the intensity of someone accustomed to reading people quickly and accurately. Sarah, we've heard so much about you. Emma tells us you work in the legal field. That's right, I replied carefully. I'm a paralegal at a family law firm downtown. How interesting, Victoria chimed in, her smile warm but not reaching her eyes. Family law must be so rewarding, helping people through difficult times. It can be, I agreed, though some of our cases involve more complex issues than just divorce and custody. Oh? Harrison's interest seemed to sharpen. What other areas does your firm handle? This was it. The moment I'd been anticipating and dreading. I could lie, deflect, and hope to avoid revealing my firm's involvement in the investigation against them. Or I could be honest and see how they reacted to learning that their future daughter-in-law's sister worked for their primary legal threat. We handle quite a bit of tenant rights work, I said, watching their faces carefully. Landlord disputes, harassment cases, that sort of thing. Harrison's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, a slight stiffening that suggested he was processing new information. That must put you in contact with some interesting characters. Tenants can be quite creative in their complaints. Some complaints are more creative than others, I replied even. But our firm has found that patterns of harassment are usually pretty easy to identify when you know what to look for. Patterns, Victoria's voice was still pleasant, but there was steel underneath. That sounds almost scientific. Legal work often document everything. Follow the evidence. Let the facts speak for themselves. Harrison nodded thoughtfully. And what do the facts usually tell you about these tenant harassment cases? I met his gaze direct. That systematic intimidation of vulnerable people is both illegal and morally reprehensible, and that the people who engage in such practices eventually face consequences for their actions. The silence that followed was charged with tension. Harrison and Victoria exchanged a look that spoke volumes about their understanding of exactly who I was and what I represented. My father cleared his throat nervously while my mother's smile became strained around the edges. Well, Harrison said finally, his voice still cordial but carrying an edge of something darker. It sounds like you're quite passionate about justice, Sarah. That's an admirable quality in a young person. I learned it from my grandfather, I replied. He always said that good people have an obligation to stand up to bullies, regardless of how much money or power those bullies might have. Another loaded silence settled over our small group. Harrison's mask of polite interest was beginning to slip, revealing something harder and more calculating underneath. Your grandfather sounds like a wise man, Victoria said smoothly. I hope his lessons serve you well in your career. The phrase carried an unmistakable warning, delivered with the kind of elegant menace that only came from decades of practice. Victoria Blackwood was letting me know that they understood exactly who I was, and what threat I posed, and that they were prepared to respond accordingly. I'm sure they will, I said, refusing to be intimidated. Family lessons tend to stick with you, don't they? The values you learn growing up, the sense of right and wrong, the understanding of what really matters in life. I looked at my parents as I spoke, hoping they would understand that my words were directed at them as much as at the Blackwood, but their expressions showed only discomfort and anxiety, the fear of people who had chosen a side and were now watching their carefully laid plans threatened by inconvenient principles. Indeed they do, Harrison agreed, though sometimes young people need time to understand that the world is more complicated than their idealistic education might suggest. Real life requires compromise, pragmatism, and understanding of how things actually work rather than how we might wish they were. And sometimes, I countered, older people need to be reminded that complexity doesn't justify cruelty, that success built on the suffering of others isn't really success at all. The confrontation was escalating beyond what was appropriate for a social gathering, but I found I didn't care. These people had threatened me, manipulated my family, and built their fortune by destroying the lives of vulnerable people. Polite social conventions seemed inadequate to the situation. Sarah, my father interrupted, his voice tight with warning. Perhaps we should let the Blackwoods enjoy the party. I'm sure they don't want to spend the evening discussing business. Of course not, Harrison said, but his eyes never left my face. Though I must say, Sarah, your passion for your work is quite evident. I hope you find it fulfilling. I do, I replied, especially when we win cases that make a real difference in people's lives. There's nothing quite like the satisfaction of holding powerful people accountable for their actions. I'm sure there isn't, Victoria said, her smile now openly predatory. Though I imagine such work can be quite stressful, all that responsibility, all those people depending on you, it must be difficult to bear such a burden. The threat was clearer now, wrapped in concern but unmistakably menacing. They were letting me know that they understood my role in the investigation, and that they had the power to make my life very difficult if I continued to pose a threat to their interests. I've found that doing the right thing is rarely easy, I said, but it's always worth it in the end. How wonderfully naive, Harrison murmured. I hope life doesn't disabuse you of such charming idealism too harshly. With that, he took Victoria's arm and moved away, leaving me standing with my parents and the weight of what had just transpired. The battle lines had been drawn publicly, and everyone involved understood the stakes. Sarah, what the hell was that? My father hissed, his composure finally cracking. Do you have any idea what you've just done? I've told the truth, I replied. Something this family seems to have forgotten how to do. My mother grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. You need to leave, right now, before you make this any worse. Worse for whom? For Emma, who's about to marry into a family of criminals. For you and Dad, who sold out your own daughter for social advancement. Or worse for me, because I refuse to be intimidated by people who think money makes them untouchable. You don't understand the situation, my father said desperately. There are things you don't know, circumstances that require careful handling. Then explain them to me. Tell me exactly what deal you've made with the Blackwoods and what you've promised them in exchange for accepting Emma into their family. My parents exchanged a look of panic and guilt that confirmed my worst suspicions. They had made a deal, and it involved betraying me to protect their investment in Emma's future. We can't discuss this here, my mother said, glancing around nervously. Too many people, too many ears. Then when? I demanded. When do I get to learn how my own family has sold me out? Sarah, please, my father pleaded. Just leave the party. We'll talk later privately. I promise we'll explain everything. I looked at both of them, seeing fear and desperation where I'd once seen strength and authority. They were drowning in a situation they'd helped create, and they wanted me to be the sacrifice that would save them. I'm not leaving, I said quietly. Not until I've had a chance to talk to Emma privately. She deserves to know what kind of family she's marrying into, even if you don't think she does. You can't, my mother said frantically. Sarah, if you tell Emma what you think you know about the Blackwoods, if you ruin this engagement, there will be consequences you can't imagine. What kind of consequences? The kind that will destroy your career, your reputation, your entire future. These people have resources, Sarah. They have lawyers and investigators, and connections that reach into every aspect of Chicago's legal and business community. If you threaten them, they will crush you. The admission hung in the air between us, a confirmation of everything I'd suspected about my family's complicity in the surveillance and intimidation campaign. They weren't just protecting Emma's engagement, they were actively helping the Blackwoods neutralize the threat I represent. So you chose them over me, I said, the words coming out more quietly than I'd intended. When it came down to choosing between your daughter and your social ambitions, you chose the money. We chose Emma's happiness, my father said, but even he didn't sound convinced. We chose her future security, over your need to be right about everything. I chose the future of our entire family over the career aspirations of one daughter who has never shown any consideration for anyone but herself, my mother added, her voice taking on the cold cruelty I remembered from childhood arguments. The words hit me like physical blows, stripping away any remaining illusions about my place in my family's priorities. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was an obstacle to be managed or eliminated. Well, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. At least now I know where I stand. I turned to walk away, but my father caught my arm. Sarah, wait, it doesn't have to be this way. We can still fix this. Fix what? The fact that you betrayed me to criminals. The fact that you're helping them intimidate me into silence. Or the fact that you just told me I've never shown consideration for anyone but myself? We can make this right, he insisted. If you just leave the party quietly, if you promise not to interfere with Emma's wedding, we can go back to how things were before. Before what? Before I discovered that the people I thought were my family would sell me out for a chance to climb the social ladder. Before you decided to prioritize your crusade against the Blackwoods over your sister's happiness. My mother snapped. I stared at her, seeing a stranger wearing my mother's face. My crusade? You mean my job? The work I do to help people who've been victimized by predators like the Blackwoods? I mean your need to be the moral authority on everything. Your inability to understand that sometimes good people have to make difficult choices to protect their families. Good people, I repeated. Is that what you think you are? Before either of them could answer, Emma appeared at my side, her face flushed with anger and something that might have been fear. Sarah, I need to talk to you, she said, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. Right now, she grabbed my hand and pulled me away from our parents, leading me through the crowd toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. I could feel eyes following us, including the calculating gaze of Harrison Blackwood, who was watching our retreat with obvious interest. What did you say to David's parents? Emma demanded when we were out of earshot of the main party. They're both furious, and David is asking questions. I don't know how to answer. I told them the truth about what I do for a living, and what my firm has discovered about their business practice. Sarah, you promised me you wouldn't cause problems tonight. No, I promised I would be here as your maid of honor. I never promised to lie about who I am or what I know. Emma's composure was cracking, revealing a desperation I'd never seen in her before. Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you understand what this could cost all of us? What could it cost, Emma? Your engagement to a man whose family destroys people's lives for profit. Your chance to marry into money built on the suffering of vulnerable family. What exactly am I supposed to be protecting here? You're supposed to be protecting me. Emma's voice rose dangerously, drawing glances from nearby guests. You're supposed to be my sister, someone who wants me to be happy, not someone who's determined to destroy everything good in my life. Everything good? Emma, listen to yourself. You're talking about marrying into a family that's under federal investigation for civil rights violations. How is that good for you? Because I love David, and he loves me, and together we can build something beautiful that has nothing to do with whatever you think his father has done wrong. The naivety in her voice was heartbreaking. Emma, you can't separate David from his family's business. He's been involved in Blackwood properties for years. He knows exactly what they do, and how they make their money. Even if that were true, which I don't believe it is, David isn't responsible for every decision his father makes. He's a good man, Sarah. Kind and generous and loving. Why can't you see that? Because I've learned to look beyond charming surfaces to see what people really are. And what I see when I look at David is someone who's been raised to believe that other people's suffering is acceptable as long as it serves his family's interest. Emma was quiet for a moment, staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. When she spoke again, her voice was different, harder. Mom and Dad told me you might say something like this. They warned me that you might try to sabotage my relationship, because you can't stand to see me succeed where you've failed. The words hit me like ice water. They prepared you for this conversation. They said you've been obsessing over some conspiracy theory about David's family, that you've convinced yourself they're criminals based on frivolous lawsuits from disgruntled tenants. Frivolous lawsuits? I stared at my sister, seeing her differently now. Emma, how long have you known about the investigation? What investigation? You keep talking about this federal case, but no one else seems to know anything about it. Are you sure it's real? Or is it just something your law firm made up to justify their existence? The question was so insulting, so deliberately hurtful that I actually stepped backward. You think I'm lying? You think I would make up federal charges against your fiancé's family? I think you've been unhappy for so long that you can't bear to see anyone else find joy. I think you've convinced yourself that David's family are villains, because it gives you a reason to feel superior to people who are more successful than you. Each word was carefully chosen to wound, delivered with the precision of someone who knew exactly where to aim for maximum damage. This wasn't my sister speaking. This was someone who'd been coached on how to destroy my credibility and my emotional stability. Who told you to say that to me, Em? No one told me anything. I'm speaking from my own heart, expressing my own feelings about watching my sister try to destroy my happiness out of petty jealousy. Petty jealousy, I repeated, feeling something cold and final settling in my chest. Is that really what you think this is? What else could it be? You've always resented me for being more successful, more social, more attractive to men. Now that I've found real love with someone wonderful, you can't stand it. The cruelty was breathtaking in its completeness. Emma had taken every insecurity I'd ever shared with her, every moment of vulnerability, and weaponized it against me. The sister who had once been my closest confidant was now systematically destroying me with intimate knowledge of my deepest fears. You know what? I said, my voice steady despite the pain. You're right. I am jealous. I'm jealous that you can look at evidence of systematic cruelty and choose to ignore it, because it's inconvenient. I'm jealous that you can prioritize your own happiness over the suffering of innocent people. I'm jealous that you can be so morally flexible that you'll justify anything as long as it serves your interests. There you go again, Emma said with a bitter laugh. Saint Sarah, moral authority on everything, looking down on the rest of us from your pedestal of righteous poverty. Righteous poverty. That's what you've chosen, isn't it? To be poor but pure, struggling but superior, unsuccessful but morally correct. Well, congratulations, Sarah. You win the prize for being the most ethical failure in the family. The words were designed to be devastating, and they succeeded. Emma had reached into my deepest insecurities and torn them open with surgical precision. But beneath the pain, something else was happening. The sister I'd been trying to protect, the family relationships I'd been desperate to preserve, were revealing themselves to be illusions. Thank you, I said quietly. Emma looked confused. Thank you for what? For showing me who you really are. For making it clear that there's nothing left here worth saving. Sarah, wait, but I was already walking away, moving through the crowd with a strange sense of liberation. The engagement party continued around me, beautiful people in expensive clothes, celebrating the union of two families built on carefully maintained lies. I no longer felt like an outsider looking in. I felt like someone who had finally escaped from a prison I hadn't realized I was in. I made it halfway to the exit before Harrison Blackwood intercepted me. He appeared at my side with the smooth confidence of a predator who knew his territory intimately. Leaving so soon, Sarah? The party's just getting started. I think I've seen enough. I was hoping we might have another conversation before you left, a more private one, where we could discuss your concerns about my family's business practices in greater detail. The invitation was delivered with polite menace, the kind of offer that wasn't really an offer at all. I don't think that's necessary. Oh, but I do. You see, Sarah, you've made some very serious accusations tonight. Claims about federal investigations, criminal charges, systematic harassment of tenants. Those are the kinds of allegations that could be considered defamatory if they prove to be false. They're not false. According to whom? Your little law firm, the same firm that's been filing frivolous lawsuits against successful property management companies for years. The dismissive tone was calculated to provoke me, to make me defend my firm and reveal more information about our investigation. But I'd learned enough about Harrison Blackwood to recognize the trap. According to federal prosecutors who've been building a RICO case against Blackwood Properties for over a year, I said calmly, the same prosecutors who will be very interested to learn that you've been using private investigators to gather intelligence about their staff member. For the first time all evening, Harrison's composure cracked. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly replaced by something much more dangerous. That's a very serious accusation, Sarah, the kind that could have significant consequences for someone in your position. Are you threatening me? I'm simply observing that young paralegals who make wild claims about federal investigations they can't possibly be privy to sometimes find their career prospects limited by their own poor judgment. The threat was barely veiled now, delivered with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to making problems disappear through intimidation and influence. Is that what happened to Rosa Martinez? I asked. Poor judgment that limited her career prospects when she complained about having her heat cut off in the middle of winter. Harrison's eyes narrowed. I have no idea who you're referring to. She's the lead plaintiff in the class action lawsuit against your company. The single mother whose testimony is going to help federal prosecutors prove that Blackwood Properties systematically targets vulnerable tenants for harassment and intimidation. Yes, Miss Martinez. I believe she was evicted for violating the terms of her lease agreement. Quite sad, really. Sometimes people in difficult financial situations make poor choices that affect their housing stability. The casual cruelty in his voice was chilling. Poor choices like reporting building code violations and organizing other tenants to demand basic maintenance, like failing to pay rent on time and disturbing other residents with her constant complaints. Property management is a complex business, Sarah. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made to protect the interests of law-abiding tenants. Law-abiding tenants like the elderly man you forced out by cutting off his water for 3 weeks, or the disabled woman whose apartment you deliberately flooded to make it uninhabitable. Harrison's mask of civility was slipping entirely now, revealing the calculating predator beneath. You seem remarkably well informed about these alleged incidents. One might wonder how a paralegal at a small law firm could have access to such detailed information about ongoing legal matters. One might wonder why a successful businessman would need to hire private investigators to spy on his future daughter-in-law's family. The direct acknowledgement of the surveillance operation hit its mark. Harrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Sarah. My family has simply been conducting due diligence about the people joining our circle. Surely you can understand the need to protect one's interests when substantial family assets are involved. Substantial assets like the money you've made by systematically destroying affordable housing and displacing low-income families, like the legitimate business interests that could be threatened by unscrupulous lawyers who manufacture evidence to support frivolous claims. We were circling each other now, two predators sizing up the threat the other represented, but I was beginning to understand that Harrison Blackwood saw himself as the apex predator in this situation. Someone who could eliminate any threat through superior resources and connection. Tell me something, Harrison, I said, deliberately dropping the pretense of formality. What exactly did my family promise you in exchange for your tolerance of Emma's presence in your social circle? His smile was cold and knowing. Your family didn't promise me anything, Sarah. They simply shared their concerns about a daughter who seemed determined to cause problems for people who were trying to welcome her sister into their community. So they told you about my job, about my firm's investigation, about the potential threat I represented to your criminal enterprise. They shared information that helped me understand why you might be predisposed to believe negative rumors about my family's business practices. It's natural for family members to want to protect each other from unnecessary conflict. The rationalization was breathtaking in its audacity. My parents hadn't betrayed me. They'd simply shared information to prevent unnecessary conflict. The surveillance and intimidation weren't attacks on my privacy. They were protective measures against my predisposition to believe negative rumors. And what did you promise them in return for their cooperation? I promised them that their older daughter's misguided professional choices wouldn't affect their younger daughter's opportunity for happiness. I promised them that family conflicts could be resolved quietly without unnecessary public attention. You promised them that you wouldn't destroy me professionally if they helped you monitor my activities and neutralize me as a threat. I promised them that reasonable people could find reasonable solutions to complex problems, solutions that served everyone's best interests, everyone except the tenants your company harasses, the families you displace, the communities you destroy for profit. Harrison stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Those people aren't your concern anymore, Sarah. As of tonight, you're going to stop being concerned about my business practices. Stop investigating my company and stop interfering in my son's relationship with your sister. And if I don't, then you'll discover that young paralegals who make false accusations against respected businessmen often find themselves facing legal and professional consequences that permanently damage their career prospects. The threat was explicit now, delivered with the casual confidence of someone who had eliminated similar problems many times before. Legal consequences like manufactured criminal charges, professional consequences like coordinated campaigns to destroy my reputation and employment prospects, consequences like defamation lawsuits, harassment claims, and professional misconduct allegations that would make it impossible for you to work in Chicago's legal community ever again. I looked at Harrison Blackwood, really looked at him, seeing past the expensive suit and cultured voice to the predator underneath. This was a man who had built his fortune by destroying people weaker than himself, who used his wealth and influence to eliminate anyone who threatened his interests. The federal investigation that had him worried wasn't his first encounter with legal opposition. It was simply the first time someone with sufficient resources had been willing to fight back. You know what the difference is between us, Harrison? Enlighten me. You think money and influence make you untouchable. You think that because you've gotten away with destroying people's lives for decades, you'll continue to get away with it forever. And you think that moral indignation and amateur legal work make you dangerous. We'll see which of us is correct. We will, because unlike the tenants you've harassed and the families you've displaced, I'm not alone in this fight. I have colleagues who care about justice, supervisors who won't be intimidated by wealthy bullies, and federal prosecutors who specialize in bringing down people exactly like you. Harrison's smile was genuinely amused now, as if I'd told him an entertaining joke. Sarah, you're a paralegal at a third-tier law firm that specializes in divorce cases and tenant disputes. You have no idea what you're up against. I'm up against a criminal who's gotten comfortable thinking that money makes him above the law. The same kind of criminal that federal prosecutors love to make examples of. Federal prosecutors who depend on political appointees, who attend fundraisers hosted by people like me. Federal prosecutors who work within a system that rewards cooperation and punishes those who threaten established interests. The implication was clear. Even federal law enforcement could be influenced or intimidated when sufficient pressure was applied in the right places. Maybe, I acknowledged, but federal cases built on systematic civil rights violations tend to develop momentum that's difficult to stop, especially when they're supported by media attention and public outrage. Media attention from journalists who work for newspapers owned by corporations that do business with people like me. Public outrage from citizens who depend on jobs provided by companies I influence. Harrison was outlining the reality of how power worked in America. The network of financial interdependence that protected wealthy criminals from the consequences of their actions. But he was also revealing something else. He was worried enough about the federal investigation to be having this conversation with me at all. You're scared, I realized. That's why you've been investigating me, why you recruited my family to spy on me. You're afraid that this federal case might actually stick. I'm cautious, Harrison corrected. I've learned that even frivolous legal challenges can be expensive and time-consuming to defend against. It's more efficient to address potential problems before they become actual threats. By silencing whistleblowers and intimidating witnesses, by helping misguided young people understand the potential consequences of their choices before they make decisions they'll regret. We stood facing each other in the elegant ballroom, surrounded by the celebration of his son's engagement to my sister, discussing the systematic destruction of my life with the polite formality of a business negotiation. The surreal nature of the situation would have been almost funny if the stakes weren't so high. So this is my last chance to walk away quietly. This is your opportunity to choose a path that serves your long-term interests, rather than your short-term emotional satisfaction. And what path would that be? You resign from your current position, citing personal reasons or career changes. You relocate to a different city, perhaps somewhere with better opportunities for someone with your skill. You stop all contact with people associated with the federal investigation into my company, and most importantly, you support your sister's marriage and maintain positive relationships with your family. The offer was comprehensive and terrifying in its implications. Harrison Blackwood wasn't just threatening to destroy my career, he was demanding that I disappear entirely, abandoning my life, my work and my principles to protect his criminal enterprise. And if I choose a different path, then you'll discover that the consequences of poor judgment can be far-reaching and permanent. Your reputation will be destroyed through a careful campaign of strategic revelations about your professional conduct and personal character. Your current employer will receive evidence of misconduct that will result in your immediate termination, and ensure that no reputable firm will hire you. Your personal finances will be scrutinized by tax authorities. Your living situation will be complicated by housing difficulties, and your family relationships will be permanently severed. The threat was comprehensive and delivered with the casual efficiency of someone who had orchestrated similar destructions many times before. Harrison Blackwood wasn't improvising. He was implementing a well-practiced system for eliminating threats to his interests. You've done this before. I've helped other young people understand the importance of making wise career choices. Most of them have found the guidance quite valuable. Most of them. Some people require more extensive education before they fully appreciate the benefits of cooperation, but everyone learns eventually. The implications were chilling. Blackwood wasn't just threatening me. He was describing a pattern of systematic intimidation and destruction that he'd used against anyone who threatened his business interests. What happened to the ones who didn't learn? They discovered that continued opposition to established interests can be quite costly, financially, professionally, personally. Some of them even faced legal consequences for their persistent misconduct, manufactured legal consequences that arose naturally from their continued poor judgment and the scrutiny such behavior inevitably attracts. I understood now why the federal investigation was taking so long, why witnesses were difficult to find, why evidence was hard to preserve. Harrison Blackwood had been systematically destroying anyone who threatened him for years, using his wealth and influence to eliminate opposition before it could gain momentum. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd revealed his methods to me directly, providing evidence of witness intimidation and obstruction of justice that could strengthen the federal case against him. Thank you, I said. Harrison looked genuinely puzzled. For explaining exactly how you've been obstructing the federal investigation, for detailing your methods of witness intimidation, for providing evidence of the systematic criminal enterprise that federal prosecutors have been working to prove. Understanding dawned in Harrison's eyes, followed immediately by a fury so intense that for a moment I thought he might physically attack me. You're recording this conversation. I'm remembering it very clearly. Every threat, every admission, every detail about how you've destroyed other people who threatened your interests. No one will believe the word of a disgruntled paralegal against a respected businessman. Maybe not, but federal prosecutors who've been looking for evidence of witness intimidation and obstruction of justice might find my testimony quite compelling, especially when it's corroborated by the surveillance evidence your private investigators have been gathering. Harrison's composure was completely gone now, replaced by the cold rage of a predator who'd been outmaneuvered by what he'd assumed was helpless prey. You have no idea what you've just done to yourself and your family. I've finally stopped being afraid of people who think money makes them untouchable. I've stopped pretending that my family's betrayal was motivated by love instead of greed. And I've started fighting back against a system that protects criminals, as long as they're wealthy enough to buy their way out of consequences. Your sister will never forgive you for destroying her engagement. My sister chose her side when she decided that marrying money was more important than marrying someone decent. Just like my parents chose their side when they decided that social advancement was more important than protecting their daughter. They were trying to protect you from the consequences of your own poor judgment. They were trying to protect their investment in Emma's future by sacrificing me to your interests. But it doesn't matter anymore, because I'm done being anyone's sacrifice. I turned to walk away, but Harrison's voice stopped me. Sarah, I looked back at him, seeing a man who'd spent decades believing that wealth and influence made him invulnerable, now facing the possibility that his criminal empire might finally collapse. This isn't over. No, I agree. It's just beginning, because now federal prosecutors are going to learn that you've been actively intimidating witnesses and obstructing their investigation. And unlike the tenants you've harassed and the families you've displaced, they have the resources to fight back. I left Harrison Blackwood standing in the elegant ballroom of the Millbrook Country Club, surrounded by the celebration of his son's engagement, contemplating the reality that his carefully constructed criminal enterprise was finally facing opposition. He couldn't simply buy or intimidate into submission. The valet brought my car around, and I drove away from the party that was supposed to represent my family's triumphant return to social prominence. Instead, it had become the moment when all the carefully maintained lies and alliances finally collapsed under the weight of their own contradiction. I had lost my family, my sister's love, and any hope of reconciliation with the people who'd raised me. But I had gained something more valuable: the knowledge that I could stand up to powerful predators and refuse to be intimidated into silence or complicity. The drive back to Chicago gave me time to process what had just happened and plan what came next. Monday morning, I would meet with Janet and the federal prosecutors to report Harrison Blackwood's attempts at witness intimidation. The investigation would expand to include obstruction of justice charges, and the case against Blackwood Properties would become even stronger. Emma would marry David if she chose to, but she would do so with full knowledge of what his family really was and what I had sacrificed to try to protect her from that truth. My parents would have to live with the consequences of choosing social advancement over family loyalty, and they would discover whether their new allies would protect them when the federal investigation expanded to include everyone who had aided in the cover-up. As for me, I would continue doing the work I'd always done, helping vulnerable people fight back against predators who thought wealth made them untouchable. But now I would do it with the knowledge that even the most powerful criminals could be defeated when enough people were willing to refuse to be intimidated into silence. The engagement party had been intended as a trap, a chance for the Blackwoods to neutralize me as a threat to their interest. Instead, it had become the moment when their criminal enterprise began its final collapse, because they had made the mistake of assuming that fear and greed were stronger than principles and courage. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to a predator is refuse to be afraid. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family members who've lost their way is to stop enabling their worst choices and start holding them accountable for the harm those choices cause. The dinner invitation had indeed turned out to be something much more significant than anyone had expected. Not a subpoena in the legal sense, but something more powerful: a summons to choose between complicity and courage, between family loyalty and moral principle, between the comfortable lies that preserve relationships and the difficult truths that sometimes destroy them. I had made my choice, and there was no going back. Monday morning brought an unexpected calm to my Chicago apartment, like the stillness that follows a devastating storm. I sat at my small kitchen table with coffee and toast, watching the sunrise paint the city skyline in shades of gold and pink. For the first time in weeks, I felt completely clear about what needed to happen next. The phone started ringing at 7:30. First my mother, her voicemail a mixture of panic and recrimination about my behavior at the party. Then my father demanding I call him immediately to discuss the damage I'd caused. Finally Emma, her message brief and cold: "I hope you're satisfied with what you've done. David and I are postponing the wedding until this mess gets sorted out." I deleted all 3 messages without responding. My family had made their choices, and now they would live with the consequences. My energy was better spent on more important matters. Janet arrived at the office early, her expression grim but determined. "We need to talk before the others get here," she said, closing her door behind us. "I got a call from the federal prosecutor's office last night. Someone contacted them claiming you've been making false accusations about the Blackwood investigation." "Let me guess. An anonymous tip about a disgruntled paralegal who's been spreading lies about a respected business family." Close. A concerned citizen, worried about potential prosecutorial misconduct, suggesting that our firm has been coaching witnesses and manufacturing evidence. Janet sat heavily in her chair. "Sarah, they're trying to discredit you before you can report what happened at the party." "Then we need to get there first. I have information about witness intimidation and obstruction of justice that could strengthen their entire case. We need to be very careful about how we proceed. If they've already planted doubts about your credibility, walking in with accusations against Harrison Blackwood could backfire." I pulled out my phone and showed Janet the recording app I'd activated during my conversation with Harrison. "What if I have proof?" Janet's eyes wide. "You recorded him. Every threat, every admission about how he's destroyed other witnesses, every detail about the systematic intimidation campaign." I hit play, and Harrison's voice filled the small office, cold and menacing as he described the consequences that awaited anyone who opposed his interests. "This is incredible," Janet breathed. "This is direct evidence of ongoing criminal obstruction." "But Sarah," recording someone without their consent is illegal in Illinois. Not in a public place where there's no reasonable expectation of privacy. The country club ballroom was full of people, servers walking around, conversations happening everywhere. Any decent lawyer could argue that our conversation was essentially public. Janet listened to more of the recording, her expression shifting from concern to excitement. This changes everything. With this evidence, the prosecutors can add witness tampering and obstruction charges to the RICO case, but we need to be strategic about how we present it. We spent the next hour crafting a careful approach. I would contact the federal prosecutor's office directly, identifying myself as a witness to attempted intimidation rather than as someone with personal grievances against the Blackwood family. The recording would be presented as evidence I'd gathered in self-defense after being threatened, not as part of some elaborate sting operation. By 10 o'clock, I was sitting in a sterile conference room in the federal building downtown, facing Assistant U. Attorney Maria Santos and FBI Special Agent David Chen. Santos was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and the kind of focused intensity that suggested she'd built her career on taking down exactly the type of criminals the Blackwoods represented. Ms. Coleman, Santos began, we understand you have information about potential witness intimidation in the Blackwood Properties investigation. I have evidence, I corrected, placing my phone on the table between us. On Sunday evening, Harrison Blackwood threatened me directly, described how he's eliminated other potential witnesses, and detailed his methods for obstructing your investigation. Agent Chen leaned forward. Before we continue, I need to inform you that we've received allegations questioning your credibility and suggesting you may have personal motivations for making accusations against the Blackwood family. I assume those allegations came from sources close to the Blackwood family. People who want to discredit me before you hear what I have to say. Can you tell us about your relationship to the family? Santos asked. I explained Emma's engagement to David, my family's sudden reconciliation with me, and my growing suspicions about their motive. I described the private investigators, the coached responses from my family, and the surveillance operation that had been targeting me for weeks. Your sister is engaged to David Blackwood, Agent Chen repeated. That creates a significant conflict of interest. It creates motivation for me to stay quiet and protect my family's social advancement. The fact that I'm here, risking those relationships, should tell you how serious the evidence is. Santos and Chen exchanged a look. Let's hear the recording. Harrison's voice filled the conference room, delivering threats and admissions with casual cruelty that was even more chilling in the stark federal building than it had been in the elegant country club. Santos took notes while Chen monitored the recording equipment, both of them occasionally exchanging glances as particularly damaging statements played. When the recording ended, Santos sat back in her chair. This is extraordinary. Harrison Blackwood essentially confessed to a pattern of witness intimidation spanning multiple years. He also detailed his methods for destroying people who threaten his interests. I added, tax investigations, manufactured criminal charges, coordinated professional sabotage. It's a comprehensive system for eliminating opposition. The problem, Agent Chen said carefully, is that this recording was made without Mr. Blackwood's knowledge or consent, in a public setting where dozens of people could have overheard our conversation. Illinois law allows recording in situations where there's no reasonable expectation of privacy. Santos nodded slowly. The legal standard would likely support admissibility, especially given the context. This represents ongoing criminal activity, which creates exceptions to normal consent requirements. What happens now? I asked. Now we expand the investigation, Santos replied. Witness tampering and obstruction of justice are federal crimes that carry significant penalty. Combined with the RICO charges we're already pursuing, this evidence could put Harrison Blackwood in prison for decades. And my family? Agent Chen's expression was sympathetic but serious. If they've been providing information to the Blackwood organization to help obstruct a federal investigation, they could be charged as accessories or co-conspirators. The words hit me like cold water, even though I'd known this was a possibility. My parents and sister hadn't just betrayed me personally, they'd committed federal crimes in the process. What kind of penalties would they face? That depends on the extent of their involvement and their willingness to cooperate with our investigation, Santos explained. People who've been manipulated or coerced into providing information sometimes qualify for plea agreements that minimize their exposure, and people who willingly participated in obstructing justice face the full consequences of their choices. I left the federal building with mixed emotions. The investigation was moving forward, strengthened by evidence that could finally bring down the Blackwood criminal enterprise. But my family's fate now rested in the hands of federal prosecutors, who would evaluate their actions with cold legal precision rather than familial understanding. Tuesday evening brought an unexpected visitor to my apartment. Emma stood in my hallway, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd seen her since childhood. Her usual polish was gone, replaced by red-rimmed eyes and the kind of exhaustion that comes from sleepless nights and impossible decisions. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I stepped aside, leading her to my small living room, where she perched nervously on the edge of my couch. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of everything that had happened settling between us like a physical barrier. "David broke up with me," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. Are you, really? Or are you relieved that your plan worked?" The accusation stung, but I could hear the pain underneath it. I never wanted to hurt you. I wanted to protect you from making a terrible mistake. By destroying my relationship, by humiliating our family in front of everyone who matters in Millbrook, by telling you the truth about the family you were planning to marry into." Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hand. "David's father called him Monday morning, told him the engagement was off, that our family had become a liability he couldn't afford to be associated with, because of the federal investigation, because of you, because you made it clear that you would never stop causing problems for their family." Emma looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "David tried to fight for us. He said he loved me and didn't care what his father thought. But Harrison told him that staying engaged to me would mean being cut off financially, excluded from the family business, disinherited completely." The casual cruelty was exactly what I'd expected from Harrison Blackwood, but seeing its impact on Emma was heartbreaking. "So David chose his father's money over your relationship. He chose his entire future over a relationship that had become impossible because of my sister's crusade against his family." Emma, listen to yourself. You're defending someone who abandoned you the moment loving you became inconvenient. I'm mourning the loss of the only man I've ever loved because my sister decided her moral principles were more important than my happiness. The conversation was following the same pattern as all our recent interactions, with Emma casting me as the villain who destroyed her perfect life out of jealousy and spite, but something in her posture suggested this wasn't the whole reason for her visit. "Why are you really here?" She was quiet for a long moment, then reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "David gave me this before he ended things, said I should give it to you." I opened the envelope carefully, finding a collection of documents that made my blood run cold. Bank statements showing payments from Blackwood properties to companies owned by my father, email exchanges between my mother and Victoria Blackwood, discussing strategies for monitoring my activity, text messages between Emma and David where she provided detailed information about my work schedule, my relationships, my personal vulnerability. The evidence of my family's betrayal was comprehensive and devastating, documented in their own words with a precision that left no room for self-deception or rationalization. "You sold me out completely," I said, the words coming out more quietly than I'd intended. "We tried to protect you," Emma replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "Mom and Dad thought if they could show the Blackwoods that you weren't really a threat, that you were just doing your job without any personal vendetta, maybe they would leave you alone. So you gave them everything: my schedule, my relationships, my weaknesses, detailed information about how to destroy my life if I didn't cooperate. We thought we could manage the situation, keep everyone happy, find a way for both families to coexist without conflict." I stared at the documents, seeing the full scope of the conspiracy my family had entered into. They hadn't just provided information, they'd actively participated in a comprehensive intelligence operation, designed to neutralize me as a threat to the Blackwood criminal enterprise. Emma, these emails show Mom coordinating with Victoria Blackwood about the best ways to discredit me professionally. These text messages show you giving David real-time updates about my meetings with federal prosecutors. We didn't know it would go this far. We thought it was just about protecting the engagement, keeping the families from becoming enemies. You knew I was working on a federal case against David's family, and you gave them information about that case. That's obstruction of justice, Emma. It's a federal crime. The weight of what she'd done was finally hitting her. The realization that her attempts to preserve her engagement had made her complicit in serious criminal activity. What's going to happen to us? That depends on what you're willing to do now. The federal prosecutors know about the family involvement. They have evidence of the information sharing, the coordination, the active obstruction of their investigation. Are we going to prison? Maybe, unless you're willing to cooperate fully, to testify about everything the Blackwoods asked you to do and everything you provided them. Emma buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I loved him so much, Sarah. I thought I was going to have the perfect life, the perfect marriage, everything I'd always dreamed of. I know you did, and I'm sorry it turned out this way, but you're not sorry you destroyed it. I considered the question carefully, weighing my love for my sister against the knowledge of what the Blackwood family represented. I'm sorry you got hurt. I'm sorry David turned out to be someone who would abandon you to protect his inheritance. I'm sorry our parents put you in an impossible position. But no, I'm not sorry that a criminal family's influence over our lives has been broken. Emma looked up at me, her face streaked with tears and ruined makeup. What happens now? Now you decide whether you want to be part of the solution, or continue being part of the problem. The federal prosecutors are building a case that could put Harrison Blackwood in prison for decades. Your cooperation could help ensure that happens. And if I refuse, then you face the consequences of obstruction of justice as a co-conspirator rather than as a manipulated witness who's willing to make things right. We sat in silence for several more minutes, the weight of impossible choices settling around us. Finally, Emma stood to leave. I need time to think. Don't take too long. The longer you wait, the less valuable your cooperation becomes to the prosecutors. After Emma left, I called Janet to report the new evidence and discuss next steps. The documents Emma had brought proved that my family's involvement in the obstruction scheme was even more extensive than we'd realized. They also provided a paper trail that would strengthen the federal case against the Blackwoods significantly. Wednesday morning, I returned to the federal building with Emma at my side. She'd decided to cooperate fully, providing detailed testimony about the Blackwood family's recruitment of our family as intelligence assets. Her information, combined with the documents David had given her, painted a comprehensive picture of a criminal organization that had systematically corrupted anyone who could threaten their interests. The next weeks passed in a blur of depositions, document reviews and strategic planning sessions. The federal case expanded to include multiple counts of witness tampering, obstruction of justice and conspiracy charges. Harrison Blackwood was arrested on a Tuesday morning, led out of his office in handcuffs, while news cameras captured every moment of his downfall. Emma testified before the grand jury, her emotional account of manipulation and coercion, helping to establish the pattern of criminal behavior that had defined the Blackwood organization for decades. My parents, faced with overwhelming evidence of their complicity, agreed to plea bargains that required full cooperation with the investigation in exchange for reduced sentences. The trial, when it finally came, was a media sensation. Harrison Blackwood, the wealthy businessman who dominated Chicago's real estate market for decades, exposed as the leader of a criminal enterprise that had systematically destroyed the lives of vulnerable tenants, while corrupting public officials and intimidating witnesses. The recording I'd made at the engagement party became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case, Harrison's own words condemning him more effectively than any outside evidence could have. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Harrison Blackwood was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Victoria received 12 years for her role in the conspiracy. David, who had cooperated with prosecutors after his father's arrest, received probation and community service in exchange for testimony about the family's business practices. My parents received 2 years each, suspended contingent on continued cooperation and community service. Emma was sentenced to 6 months house arrest and 3 years probation, her punishment reduced because of her extensive cooperation with the investigation. The Blackwood Properties empire collapsed within months of the convictions, its buildings sold to pay restitution to the thousands of tenants who had been victimized by the family's systematic harassment campaign. The money funded new affordable housing initiatives and legal aid programs for low-income tenants. 6 months after the trial ended, I stood in the garden of my grandfather's old house, now mine after my parents' bankruptcy forced them to sell their Millbrook mansion. Emma was there too, helping me plant new roses in the beds our grandmother had once tended. Our relationship was still fragile, still rebuilding from the devastation of the past year, but we were trying. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, as we worked side by side in the afternoon sun. "Everything that happened, all the pain we went through?" I thought about the question carefully, considering everything we'd lost and everything we'd gained. Our family's social status was gone, their financial security destroyed, their carefully maintained image in ruin. But the Blackwood criminal enterprise had been dismantled, justice had been served for countless victims, and we'd discovered what we were really made of when tested by impossible circumstances. "I regret that it had to happen the way it did," I said finally. "I regret that people got hurt, that you lost someone you loved, that our family paid such a high price, but I don't regret standing up to criminals, and I don't regret refusing to be intimidated into silence." Emma nodded slowly, her hands gentle as she settled a new plant into the rich soil. "David came to see me last week. How is he?" "Broken, lost, trying to figure out who he is without his father's money and influence." She paused, wiping dirt from her hands. "He apologized for choosing his inheritance over our relationship, said he realized too late what really mattered." "Are you going to give him another chance?" "No, because you were right about something important. I deserved someone who would choose me over money, who would fight for our relationship instead of abandoning it when things got difficult." We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the afternoon sun warming our backs as we planted flowers that would bloom long after the pain of this year had faded into memory. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet, who'd been promoted to senior partner after our firm's role in bringing down the Blackwood organization brought us national recognition and new clients. The message was simple: new case, another wealthy family, another pattern of abuse. "Are you ready to do this again?" I looked at Emma, at the house where our grandfather had taught us that good people have an obligation to stand up to bullies, at the garden we were restoring together despite everything that had tried to tear us apart. "Always," I texted back, "because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to let power and privilege shield cruelty from consequences. Sometimes justice requires sacrifice, and sometimes the price of doing the right thing is losing everything you thought you wanted." But in the end, what we'd built from the ruins of our family's destroyed ambitions was stronger and more valuable than anything we'd lost. We'd learned that real wealth isn't measured in money or social status, but in the courage to stand up for what's right even when it costs you everything. The dinner invitation that had seemed like a trap had turned out to be an opportunity, a chance to discover who we really were when everything comfortable and familiar was stripped away. And what we'd discovered was that we were stronger, braver, and more principled than we'd ever imagined possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.